Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed
One.
Fields, along with Rogan Smith, who's back.
Hey.
Ken Williams, who's back off one of his jaunts.
Oh, Ken, you weren't here?
They both jaunt, and they both traipse.
We both vacation.
So
Hey, Ken, that's right.
Yeah, well, at least you said it was a vacation as opposed to someone died or something, some lie. So so you're telling me about some stuff that's happening that I'm not privy to or aware of.
I'm surprised.
Because I've not been following the,
Well, I understand
the media
that,
and all that kind of stuff. I just kind of blocked out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I watching movies and the History Channel and stuff like that. But so you're telling me about your boy Kraft Dinner, macaroni and cheese. What's happening with that?
That's a serious name, eh?
Huh?
That's a serious name, eh?
So he wanted a little cheese on the macaroni.
So I don't know if that's where he wanted the cheese.
It depends what you call the macaroni.
Yeah. So Robert Kraft, the Patriots owner, was
he was on TV with the trophy.
Yes, of course. Okay. Because the Patriots just killed it at the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But he's been charged with, I think it was like 2 counts of soliciting prostitution. Mm-hmm. Went to a massage parlor at a seedy-looking strip mall.
What was the name of
Jupiter,
the thing?
Florida.
What was the name?
Orchid something? Orchids of Asia Day Spa.
Okay.
Orchids of Asia.
So he don't want no Kraft Dinner. He want a little shrimp fry.
He wants some orchids of Day Spa.
Hey? He don't want no cheese on the macaroni. He want a little soy sauce.
He wanted soy sauce.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Kiko Man.
Oh my gosh, you're so silly.
La Choy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was soliciting prostitution from this seedy looking place, man.
But you and Ken, the people who are on vacation, you all said that apparently we have him on tape.
Say we.
We have him on tape twice.
He was busted on tape twice.
So he was going to the same place.
Oh yeah.
So
Because he enjoyed the first. Yeah, so he came back.
So they had what you call in the Bahamas surveillance on that. Is that what they had?
Yes. And they say it was like human trafficking as well and massive prostitution ring. So
massive.
Yeah, when you use the word massive.
Well, now solicitation of what is it called? Prostitution. In what is that? Is that a misdemeanor? Is that a felony?
I don't.
Kim, can you look that up?
I don't think it's a felony.
Because I would hate to think that Bob,
let's see what he could be facing.
The Kraft man, sweet and sour. That's what they call Bob
sweet
now.
And sour.
That Bob would be in jail for some sweet and sour when he could get all the pork he wants.
So they say he's denied having
they have no tape,
activity, right? But they got him. So far, 173 people have been charged with crimes in the bust. That's a lot of people.
So that's just set up for. Oh, no, you were watching that for a while.
Yeah, they were watching that for a while.
Yeah, but see, because you can't be. Listen, Bob, you can't be going to think where it is on the side of the road.
No, man. Hold on. I'm just reading this. The spa offers services such as waxing, anti-aging facials, acne treatment, and 11 different types of massages, including a Tokyo Ultimate Forehand Massage.
That's like what? Where that is? That on your hand up here? Where that is? Anyway, I just say...
That one sounds come on.
Do they do that? I wonder if they do that at places like Mandara and things like that. But anyway, so listen, what's that? What happened? So if I would go to a massage therapist and say to her, I would like the what is it? The Tokyo I don't want just the forehand. I want the Tokyo. That's the code.
The Tokyo Ultimate Forehand Massage.
Exactly. Don't just give me no forehand. This ain't no tennis. I want the Tokyo Ultimate. Okay? Bob sent me. Do you go in there and say, Bob sent me?
No, I don't think
so. Bob can't go nowhere for a little while then.
I don't know.
And one good thing, Bob's short, so no one will notice him anyhow.
It doesn't say, what he faces or anything like that.
But so Bob just drive up there in his car? You have a car?
He probably got dropped off.
Oh, he got dropped off. Okay, all right.
I mean, but you can't just fly in the girls who you want. Like, why would you go to I think
let me explain something to you.
When sex gets in the mind, something happens, something else takes over.
Let me explain something.
You just don't think rationally, apparently.
I've explained this to you before, Rogan Smith. Everyone has a little thing. Okay? There are people who they like to wear headphones when they're doing the Jungamura. Okay?
I know that.
Okay? That's their thing. They refuse to have sex without the headphones.
Okay.
That's their thing. They might have $1 trillion, and by the way, they have to have a special headphones. It have to be Sony. It can't be, like the beat. Okay? So whatever it is, right? So that's their thing. Bob thing is what do you call it? The strip mall shrimp fry.
I think it's like you say, like when you're exposed to so much, it's like the
That's
thrill is gone,
yeah.
and so it's like you need to do something. Maybe the sneaking around, or maybe the prospect of being caught is intriguing or thrilling.
Bob probably tell the wife that you live in Jupiter. Jupiter, is high rent.
Jupiter,
Florida. That's where Tiger and all that.
Yeah, they
that's
say
the
like
big,
30 minutes from like Mar-a-Lago.
No, Mar-a-Lago's a joke. That's Palm Beach. Jupiter.
They say 30 minutes from it.
Yeah,
That's what
Jupiter is like, it's an enclave of extremely wealthy people between West Palm and I think Fort Lauderdale, right? And so Bob would fit in that crew. So Bob probably said to the wife, "Listen, let me go pick up a couple of
his girlfriend.
Let me go pick some Chinese food. I'm just gonna pick up some Chinese food." And so he, that might even have, how these strip malls is. If you go, they have the tailor, the food, and the spa all in one go.
The eyebrow waxing place.
All in one is like a complex.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bob probably figured, let me stop in here, get an appetizer. Okay.
So you have his
and
receipt.
then on the the appetizer is the Hong Kong, Tokyo.
The ultimate for hand.
That's the appetizer for Bob.
Oh, okay.
And then when he finished, he just clean himself up and then stop by and do a little shrimp. Probably just put in the order. So you just pick it up to go.
Yeah.
And then say, "See, we good." Yeah, but he probably got off on the sneaking. It's okay. You don't want to get into people's head.
Yeah. You talking about food got me thinking about the food that I had in D.C. There's this wonderful place called District Soul Food. I wasn't keen on going because I wasn't like big on soul food, but then like the hubby convinced me to go and get some of that, and it was so good. Like I don't even know how I got into eating like the collard greens and like the hush puppies and all this stuff. That stuff was so delicious. Kendrick, you're a foodie, so I know you're into that. Like I can't wait to go back just for that. It's so delicious.
Yeah, no, they have a lot of
catfish and all that good stuff.
food. They got a lot of range of good food in those cities. That's good.
Love it.
So, what else is new? Anything you said that the Trumpster was accused of something? I didn't see that. Didn't you?
That's one of his old staffers.
Right?
No, this was like a couple minutes ago. It broke. No, so it was an old staffer that said that he kissed her or something without her permission. But that doesn't surprise me.
In the world of Trump, my boy Kavanaugh, he did some rapes, so alleged. Right. So what is alleged kissing?
Yeah.
This is chintzy stuff compared to what these other people getting away with.
So he grabbed her hand and forcibly kissed her. Yeah, nothing surprises me now about Donald Trump, so I'm not really checking for him. The big thing for me was about Jussie Smollett from Empire. You've been following that too, Kendrick? But the story takes some
but I don't know much about
some turns, right?
It's insane.
What's another turn? The Chicago police chief was on Good Morning America this morning, and he's like, he's trying to clear the air to say, listen, don't think like this is basically a witch hunt or anything. We were taking this very seriously at first,
right, and then
and they did. And now we see how things are unraveling because these two African brothers, they confess that what all happened. And he says there's even more evidence that they're going to bring to the fore. So that's what's so scary. Yeah. And meantime, Jussie is still maintaining that.
Well, what's his story?
His story.
Why would he do that?
Well, allegedly, it's because he wanted a salary increase.
So getting beat up gets you a salary increase?
I guess it gets you attention.
What's your name again? Jussie?
Jussie Smollett.
It's not Jesse. It's Jussie.
No, it's Jussie.
Like he must see Jussie gone from around here. Okay.
Like must see Jussie.
So Jussie would go to the employer and say, I was the subject of a racial attack. I would need some more money.
No.
That would be his plan?
I guess what would happen is the public would get all up in arms about what happened, and he'd get this renewed attention, and then of course that attention would translate into viewership on Empire, and so they'd say, we can't lose this guy right now because he's hot in the streets.
That's what Jussie came up with?
When I spoke to him an hour ago, that's what he told me.
That was his plan? That's his plan.
You think he'll kill himself?
Why would he do that?
Because
he ain't got a job? Well, Jussie is damaged goods now in Hollywood.
Right? Nobody's going to fool with that for a while.
Jussie, we can't, you can, maybe you can do some impersonation videos or something,
I just don't know who we talked to about this. I think
the guys. You talked to yourself.
The guys who took the money should have said, bro, this ain't even.
And then they on tape, and they get caught, right?
Well, the thing is, the tape didn't, the surveillance camera or whatever, and where they wanted to be, wasn't even pointing in the right direction to even catch it.
They didn't get it together.
No.
Jesse director play bad.
He's an actor. He should know where the cameras are.
Anyway, we'll take a break. Our guests this afternoon again. We got two guests. We've got some folks from the Global Ports folks who just
won their bid.
And then also we have the Attorney General on, Mr. Carl Bethel, talk to us about this EU stuff and what's going on with this blacklisting, man. Jeez, can you ever get off of it?
No.
Whew. Anyway, we should just go there and say, listen, put us on the list, eh?
No, you don't want that.
All right, we'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan, the returned Rogan Smith. And Ken is the comeback Ken kid. See, KKK.
Oh,
I want to say it like that.
Yeah.
CKK.
It's with a C.
Yeah, but it's you have to do it for the
like the Kardashians.
Yeah, exactly. You have to do it for the double alliteration. So you throw a K there. Anyway, we got a couple of good guests this afternoon. We always have good guests, but we have some special guests, hot off the presses, I guess you would say. Global Port Holdings yesterday was announced by the Minister of Tourism, Dionisio Duaguila, that Global Ports was the winner of the RFP that was out there for the last couple of months. And we have with us, and you're the CEO?
No, I'm not the CEO, but I'll take a promotion.
What are you?
I'm the head of business development for the Americas.
Well, we'll call you CEO.
Yeah, CEO. It works for me. I'll tell them you said so.
Yeah, Colin Murphy, who is whatever he just said for Global Ports, but he's a big wig.
Well, I'm the CEO now.
He's the CEO. We've been known to promote people. We got Whitney Hasty. He's the CEO of BPL. We promoted him right here on this show. Awesome. In fact, we did not only promote him, we got him the job.
There we go.
Yeah, we got him the job. But so see how you do here today, Colin, and maybe we can put in some plugs for you.
Yeah, you never know. Listen, I need all the help I can get, Ed, so I'll take it.
No, let me disclose, in all full disclosure, I'm the managing partner of Downtown Nassau Partnership, and so I've met Colin and his team on various occasions. They in fact reached out to the DNP prior to the RFP when they did an unsolicited proposal to the government, and we were very happy to really engage with them because they were looking to get our input as to various aspects of the project, and we were very happy to work with them. So first of all, congratulations, Colin.
Thank you very much.
I know that they're you don't want to be in these people's position. I mean, I say all the bidders, okay? Because there's a lot of work, a lot of cash, a lot of stuff, and a lot of nervous stomachs.
Yeah.
Okay?
This is true.
Yeah.
So tell us in your mind, Colin, what would have given, from your perspective, because I assume you would have known some of the other bidders, what they were doing, what would have given you the edge so where the government would have said, okay, and the vetting committee, there was a vetting committee,
yes,
would have said, hey, this is the plan.
Okay, I mean, I don't have that much detail on what the other bids look like, but I think from what the minister said yesterday, that our whole goal when we approached this was not just to tidy up the port and make the port itself look pretty, but to do something that could be transformative for Nassau. That when we first started the conversation, when we first began, we were told by lots of people that's what this project needs to be, and so that really was our guiding star, if you like, moving forward. So our bid was 250 million, and the majority of that money will actually be spent outside of the gates of the port to make the port a world-class waterfront, not just for the cruise lines and the cruise passengers, but for the citizens of Nassau, and that's really our goal. So we took a very innovative approach, even to the architecture that we looked at. People are very used to seeing what I think of as sort of Caribbean colonial architecture. But the problem with Caribbean colonial architecture is it's all over the Caribbean, and there's nothing sort of necessarily unique about it. So we wanted to differentiate this project. We wanted to give Nassau some iconic architecture that would be on people's postcards they send home. In the same way, for example, as the Sydney Opera House is an iconic structure, and that's kind of what we're aiming for. So I think it was that. It was this sort of transformative effect, a radically different approach.
Well, and the thing is, what I can tell you from my perspective is that, and I know I met with our guest just recently, our other guest, the AG, who was saying how he had been to Santiago in Chile, and how there's the old city, there's a new city. So there's this juxtaposition of the old and the new. Because one day that building will be thought of as colonial or historic, not colonial, but historical and deserving of heritage preservation.
Well, even in my hometown, I'm from the UK and grew up in London, and if you go to London now, it's a fantastic mix of old and new.
Right. It's not like old castles.
Yes, it's not all castles. It's cutting edge modern architecture combined with the historic, beautiful buildings. So it works.
Yeah. One of the things that impressed me, and I think it's important, we did not make any statements. This is the DNP. Prior to the process being completed, because it would have been improper. But that you have taken some major steps to be inclusive. I know you met with a lot of stakeholders. I mean, everyone who I would speak to, just out of the blue, would say, oh, yeah, I saw that. They came and talked to us. Yeah. You talked to the taxi drivers. You spoke to the store market folks. That is a completely different approach that a lot of developers have taken in the past. Why did you decide to go down that road?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is to learn and to understand what is important to this community and the stakeholders, and that we so badly want to be a part of. So we need to educate ourselves on what's important to everybody. And I also think it's important, even more so now that we won the bid, is that people understand who we are. It's not just a foreign corporation that nobody knows, but they understand who we are, what we do, what our values are, what's important to us. And so they know who this company is that they're entrusting care of their port to.
Yeah. What was some of the biggest concerns they had when you were sitting down meeting with these folks? Because I know on the ground a lot of tour operators were fearful that they'd be shut out, and I guess there will be a bit of that because you're going to have a vetting process as to who's going to be in the port. But what was their biggest concern?
I mean, the biggest concern, frankly, was just let's get something done. I think it seemed that people were fed up with waiting for something to be done, and false promises over the years. And I think a lot of people began to think that nothing was ever going to happen. And so there was a real sort of hunger for a project like this to come and transform downtown Nassau. I mean, the individual stakeholders, everyone has concerns, of course, whether it doesn't matter who you are, a retailer or a taxi driver or a tour operator or whatever, because change is coming. But our job is to make sure that the change that is coming is good. And I don't just mean for us, and not just good for the cruise lines, not just good for the cruise passengers, but good for the people of the Bahamas. And that's really our guiding principle. So we're going to be spending a lot of time understanding the needs of all these stakeholders and what we can do to actually make their lives better and help them run an organized business.
Well, my own experience, I can tell you, Rogan, is that when input was given, it was not just, you go into many of these meetings and you say things to people. And you give your input based on your concerns. Yeah. It's when that's transformed to paper. So a lot of the, for instance, issues we had with regard to parking and things like that, even things we had already pre-planned prior to meeting with these folks, were incorporated into the plan. So, it's inclusion, right? I mean, I once heard a mayor of Charleston say, the way you make this thing successful is you have to be inclusion. It isn't just for one sector of the population.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, you are our client. Yeah. You are our partner. You are our landlord. When I say you, I mean the people of the Bahamas. I mean, essentially, we're a tenant, and to be successful, we have to make sure that we take into consideration the needs and views of as many people as possible. So it was incredibly helpful, all the various meetings I had and lots of input and lots of ideas.
Speak to, which I think, to me, is the goosebump aspect to this. You can go all around the world and you can see airports and you can see ports. and they're generally owned by some conglomerate,
Yeah.
some multinational. But this scenario, to me, where the Bahamian people will have the capacity to have ownership via some sort of IPO or some sort of share offering,
Yep.
is to me, I mean, it's groundbreaking. I don't know where it exists anywhere else in the Caribbean. I don't know where it exists anywhere else in the world, to be honest with you. I mean, you would know because you travel the world. But where, you can create something that huge and say to the average guy on the street, you can own a piece of it.
Well, that's exactly right. I don't know of any other ports that have this kind of local ownership. The intent is not to get half a dozen big business guys together and have them make big investments and reap all the rewards. We really want to do this for the guy on the street. We want taxi drivers and retail shop owners and tour guides and to really have a stake. They can buy a share in this port for $1,000. And then they can own that and they can pass that down to their kids. And this is something that will be growing in value over the years.
It's like buying Coca-Cola.
Yeah, it's like buying a share because we want everyone to feel they have some ownership in this project. It's really important. I mean, we can build a building, we can build things, but we need the help of everybody in Nassau to help make the most of this opportunity to really transform the downtown area. And we think it's a sort of a key part of our value system is that we have to make sure that the local folks see the upside in this. It's not just big business, but it's the stakeholders. It's the
and that's only the direct. I mean, at the end of the day, a new port benefits the country as a whole.
Oh my God! I mean, the transformation is going to be. I mean, I'm so excited about. I worked for a cruise line for 20 years. I've been in this business for a long time, and we had lots of conversations at the cruise lines about. Oh my gosh! I wish somebody would come and change Nassau because it could be so great. And here we are so for me personally to be part of this project is awesome.
I had to comment on a thing today in the paper, and I said, I'm just glad that at some point when this is completed, that'll no longer be the subject of a conversation.
Right. I remember us sitting on this show, and how many times have we talked about when we came back from traveling away and saying how there's so many. I was happy to hear you say that there's going to be a focal point, like kind of like how when you look at Sydney Harbor, but that was so lacking in the Bahamas and in Nassau and New Providence, and a lot of times we rely on that historic Atlantis Bridge as the central point in New Providence, and so it's good to hear that there's going to be something that people are going to look at downtown Nassau, and that's going to be an attraction, something to behold.
I think it really will, and of course the auditorium that we're building, the outside auditorium, is going to be a focal point of entertainment in the evenings. We want to have concerts there. We want to bring big name artists there, but we also want the local musicians to have an opportunity to perform. We want to do movie nights under the stars where people can come down with their families and put a blanket down and bring a picnic and watch a movie. Well, just to we are actively looking for ways to sort of bring a bit of life back to downtown Nassau, and this is one of the way we hope to make it happen.
I was going to ask if you saw photos.
The photos are fantastic.
This is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, we hired the world's leading port architect, Bermelo Esramil from Miami, and they've done an absolutely fantastic job. And it's hard for people to imagine, I think, when they see this. How do you go from where we are today, from what we're going to be?
Let me ask you this: your chairman often said, I heard him say that, now first of all, let's talk about global. You have ports where?
Okay, this is a long list which I can't remember all of them, so I'll give you the highlights. So we have 16 ports at the moment and 2 cargo ports.
It's a test. You have to name one.
You're testing me, are you?
This is what we do. We test you.
But the ports that we have in our portfolio include some of the greatest cruise ports in the world. For example, we have Barcelona, which is probably the busiest cruise port in the Mediterranean, where many ships start their Mediterranean cruises from. We have Venice, which is obviously one of the world's great cities. We have Malta. We have, I think, 3 ports in Italy. We have ports in Turkey. We have Lisbon. We have Singapore. We had at Havana last year. So we also recently signed for Antigua. So we have some of the world's best cruise ports in our portfolio. And what that allows us to do is we can learn from what works somewhere in another part of the world, and what would work in Bahamas, and how we can transfer that knowledge and those learnings to make us more successful here, make the project more successful here. And so we're the world's largest cruise port operator. There really isn't anyone else that is that kind of has the level of experience that we do in many different countries.
A point I bring up often, and I know it's the kind of elephant in the room, because obviously the cruise ship industry is a giant industry, is that for the first time I feel, this is my own feeling, is that there is some balance now at the negotiation table when it comes to the cruise ships, because, before we were essentially at their mercy. Now, again, I'm not belittling or anything. I'm just talking about the reality of the Bahamas was at the mercy as other countries. But the reality is you control a lot of ports and a lot of berths that they would like to go to.
This is true.
So it'd be like, if I owned, I'm Delta Airport, not Delta, Atlanta Airport, which Delta likes to go to. Well, if I owned a bunch of other airports, and Delta said, well, I don't like coming to Delta anymore. Yeah. Oh, well, we'll have to look at some of these others. But it's not one out of that's onerous. It gives a balance. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, the cruise industry is a fantastic success story.
Right,
if you look at the growth of that industry over the last 30, 40 years, I mean, it's I can't think of another industry that has done so well. And then you look at the headwinds that they've had to overcome, whether it's 9/11 or diseases with SARS or financial crash or whatever. The business keeps growing. Right. So the cruise lines,
it gives a value for the dollar.
Oh my! It's tremendous, and the business is just beginning. I mean, it seems like they're a huge business now.
We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after news. And I'm going to ask you why the Bahamas. I know your chairman has always said to him this is the most exciting destination in the Caribbean. And obviously, if it was that before, hopefully it'll even be more so afterwards. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith. Our guest this afternoon, for the moment, is Colin Murphy. We're also going to have the Attorney General, Mr. Carl Bethel, on in a few minutes after Colin leaves. We're just virtually having just guests roll through the studio, Rogan. But Colin is the head of business development for the Global Ports Holding.
Very good.
And
you got it right.
I can promote you and demote you.
I was the CEO just now. What happened there? I've just got. You can promote and you can demote.
It's the power we have. But the thing is that there are a lot of ports now. Nassau for a long time, and I'm sick of it, to be honest with you, because I think it's over the top to some extent. Certainly a lot of improvement needed, but the thing about the crime and all that's over the top.
Yeah.
So Nassau is one of many ports in the Caribbean. Okay. For that matter, one of many ports in the world.
You could have gone anywhere.
Tell us what you know about the port of Nassau that we don't know from the positive side. We know the negatives. We know the hustling and the disorganization and all that sort of thing, which used to happen at the airport. We had the whole same kind of chaotic stuff happen at the airport. But tell us what brought you here and said, this is where we want to be.
Well, I think one thing that a lot of people forget, that the modern cruise industry is, let's say, 50 years old. I mean, I'm off with that date, but let's just say. And what was the first destination? It was the Bahamas. So of the modern cruise
industry. I don't even know people know that.
The modern cruise industry was made in the Bahamas. When the first ships with Newt Gloucester sailed his first ship out of Miami to the Bahamas, and then Carnival started, and so the history in Nassau with the cruise industry is phenomenal. So you have millions of people that have taken a cruise and have come to Nassau that way, and have been introduced to the Bahamas that way. They've grown up cruising to the Bahamas. So it's not by coincidence. I mean, obviously, Bahamas is very fortunate with their proximity to the USA, but the Bahamas is a fun, free, kind of carefree, happening kind of place. Atlantis, a lot of people, our cruise guests, will go to Atlantis and enjoy what happens there, which you may know of. You may know that place. So Nassau has this terrific heritage, terrific opportunity. It's the biggest cruise port in the world. 3.5 million people.
See, no one knew. It's not bigger than Florida though.
No, but in terms of a destination port where people go for a port of call, as we would call it, a transit port. We want to take that number from 3.5 million to 5.5 million, but you have to do it the right way. You can't just have people flooding into the city. So you have to do it the right way and plan for success. So Nassau is, I guess what I'm trying to say, Nassau is deep in a lot of cruisers' hearts because of that history and heritage.
When, for the last 10, 15 years, and all of these people in this room, Rogan, Vincent Vaughn can tell you, we go back a long way in the world of journalism and media, etc. There's always this fear about Cuba opening up. And it always used to occur to me, and I remember telling this to several ministers of tourism, that rather than being fearful, we should be planning. Mm-hmm. And one of those things that we should be planning on doing is the cruise ship business is going to want to create as least a carbon footprint as possible, spend as least amount of fuel money on fuel as possible, and if they can have 3 ports that are in the same vicinity, then they will love that. And all we have to do is to get our port up to speed. Now we have a bonus in that you have a presence in Cuba, mm-hmm. and you have a presence in the Bahamas, and that means that you would be, in my view, it would be advantageous to you to negotiate scenarios where those ports come into play and complement each other.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Havana, which we took over the management of last year, at the moment we're only accepting 30% of the cruise bookings that apply for a space in Havana. So it's very small. There's 2 berths, but it will grow over time. They'll be adding berths. But most of certainly the big modern ships, they just don't typically go to one country. You need an itinerary. Mm-hmm. So you need a number of ports that are complementary and interesting and different to make up an itinerary. I understand that the 3-4 day ships may just be Bahamas-centric, mm-hmm. but the big modern ships, the big ships that have the top-of-the-line features, top-of-the-line passengers, they need an itinerary to go to. And with Havana anchoring ships in the Caribbean, and then with what we're going to be doing in Nassau, you get another great port that's anchoring ships in the Caribbean again. So we don't look at it as competitive. We look at it as complementary.
Okay. No, it's and I just think that it really helps your business model in terms of being able to have those 2 particular ports. You have one with a Hispanic, Latino flair. You have one with an English flair. I mean, I think it really complements. Look, I think that we're going to probably be hearing more from you, Colin.
I think you're probably going to be sick of me.
Days and years to come. Let the chairman know that I forgive him.
Thank you. I will.
He must pay homage.
He would love to be here. He would love to be here.
He's a colorful fellow, Rogan. Turkish descent.
Yep.
And very passionate.
Born in France, I think.
Very passionate about this project to the extent that every time I spoke to him, all he would say is, what can we do to make it even more better? Oh, I don't like this. Let's make it even grander,
Yes.
So if we're going on that long, I think Nassau has a very great future, and I think that your development will have a very, very critical part in the redevelopment of our downtown.
Thank you, Ed. I'm grateful for that, and thank you, Rogan. And we really feel blessed that we've been given this, and proud that we've been given this opportunity by the Bahamian people to bring Nassau back to the sort of dominance that it used to have in this region in terms of the cruise tourism. So we're very thankful and grateful. Thank you.
Well, please feel free to come on anytime and let us know what you're doing.
I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Nice to meet you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with Rogan Smith. We've had a busy little schedule today, but good news. I think maybe, really I don't know if we were the first show since the announcement. I'm hoping that we certainly had an opportunity to share with the Bahamian people something that is very exciting, Mr. Carl Bethel, who is now our guest, Attorney General Carl Bethel. We had with us just now the Global Ports folks, so very exciting stuff.
Yeah. Good evening, Ed and Rogan. Mm-hmm. It's a great pleasure to be here. Hopefully we can address any issues you have. I can't promise you.
Yeah, you can't promise you.
Yeah,
but so we were finished with that. But why we invited the minister on? Minister, since 2000, to be honest with you, to put this in context, we've been under the attack from the international financial sector and governments from the day we use those 2 words, bank secrecy, or tax haven. I think I don't know which is worse, tax haven or bank secrecy, but anyway. So that's been under for a while. But since 2000, something seemed to take hold with this OECD and FATF or FTAF or whatever it's called, and the word that we have all become accustomed to, blacklisting, and what we needed to do to avoid it, and what we needed to do to stay ahead of the game. And we threw a kitchen sink at them in 2000, late 2000, with everything on that list to the detriment, in my view, of the Bahamian people having to take a month to get a basic, simple savings account and prove where you live and who you know and who you don't know and your ma and all that. It seems, Mr. Attorney General, that we have not gained ground, that the powers that be in the international court, so to speak, or the international arena, really are kind of bouncing our, playing with us, man.
Well, I think it would be most helpful if we first sort of understood the nature of the games that are being played.
Okay.
They're different.
You agree they're games.
Well, that their positions are advanced by one, and you have to advance another position, or etc., and try to see how you get the best position on the checkers board. Yeah. Well, in 2000, the issue was anti-money laundering, and it was the proceeds of crime. At that time, terrorism. No, that wasn't the issue.
Just those two things.
Yeah, terrorism wasn't the main issue. It was a side issue, but it wasn't the main issue because remember, that was 2000, and 2001 is when 9/11 occurred.
Right.
But as a result, the 2000 attempt was their approach to the bombers was you don't cooperate in criminal matters that have a tax component.
Okay.
There were a host of letters that go out, we do not cooperate in these matters because they involve issues of taxation and we don't enforce other people's tax laws. So that was the legal jurisprudence of the whole wide world up until 2000. But the grandees, the big countries in the OECD decided they were going to shift the world and shift the legal basis of international cooperation and override centuries of common law in the English jurisdiction, certainly. Mm-hmm. And, of course, England by that time was a member of the EU, and its law was becoming more and more compliant with civil law, which is the law in the European Union, not common law. Right. So that was the push, was all to do with cooperation in the fight against crime. After 2011, they started to add components of counter-terrorism issues into the law as well. Fortunately, we had already passed an International Cooperation Act that allowed us to factor in a lot of these anti-terrorist stuff and terrorist listings and getting the names of persons condemned by United Nations Security Council's resolutions, like Osama bin Laden, etc. We were able to prescribe them, get the Governor General to sign. So we stayed pretty much up to, once we got through the trauma of 2000, we were able to stay pretty much in step with the world right up until 2014. When they changed their own rules, brought in, they were starting something called the fourth round of mutual evaluations, and in the fourth round they changed their rules to have that they didn't just want to see that you were what they call technically compliant, meaning that your laws criminalized were in sync with their 40 recommendations. Right. You had to show that you also were being effective in the way your laws are being applied.
And explain that to people because that's very important.
The whole thing has changed, and this is why, even though, for example, in 2017, 2 weeks after we came in, the Bahamas was evaluated based on what had happened for the previous 5 years, as being only compliant technically with 18 of 40 FATF recommendations. And that was the reason why we got into this whole blacklisting threat situation. When they looked at our effectiveness, it was even worse. We were found to be effective in only 5 of 11 benchmarks of effectiveness. Only 5 of 11.
Now
which means
explain to people
6.
what that means.
What that means is they'd say, okay, you have a law that criminalizes the proceeds of crime. How many money laundering cases have you brought?
Right.
0.
How many people?
How many people have you charged with money laundering offenses?
0.
0.
Yeah.
Up to that point. 2017, it was basically maybe 1 in 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good example of them. And then they would look and say, okay, you say that you have a securities commission and a compliance commission. What have these different regulatory bodies done to actually communicate and have a dialogue with and train the people that they are supposed to be
And sanction.
And yes, and they also wanted, and they told the Bahamas this since 2015, that they wanted administrative sanctions brought in so that if regulated entities such as banks or financial and corporate services providers or attorneys did not do what when they were investigated, they go in and look at the files and say, okay, have you kept all due diligence on all your clients?
Okay.
Do you have evidence of that they have their home address?
Yes.
You have their electricity bills? Okay, if you find that, you have no power to sanction them. You have no power to make them comply, in other words, with your own laws.
Right.
And so they wanted administrative sanctions.
And I
We
imagine
knew
if
this.
you have laws.
The Bahamas knew this since the latest 2015, but nothing was done.
And I assume that if you have laws on the books, Mr.
Yes.
Attorney General, that says, let's say there's a $10,000 fine for this thing.
Right.
How many people have you fined?
The next
Right.
question, but we couldn't even make first
You
base.
couldn't even get to.
In-
you didn't
in-
even have the rules.
At the end of May 2017, we weren't even at first base because we did not have the rules, we did not have the laws in place, and had things gone differently. I mean, in fairness, I think the former government got distracted with Bahama. In fairness, but the fact is that the things that could have been done weren't. If they had been done, we would have been much further ahead on this issue of compliance with what they call the immediate outcomes. We would have had a framework with the necessary fines for administrative fines, etc. And the only question then would have been, how many have you fined over the last year,
That's
2
we
years?
dropped the ball and not the fact that they're actually moving the goalposts. Then.
No. The goalpost changed by
these are
the
rules,
imposition of these immediate outcomes, the 11 immediate outcomes, which were all targeted towards how effective your law is. So you see the problem we're in today. We caught up with our law, with that whole host of new laws we did in 2017. But now we have to show effective implementation. And so we got put into this action plan, which is like a sort of a grayish sort of list. We're testing to see whether or not you are effectively implementing your own laws.
Does it help us?
But we don't have enough of a track record to get off.
Right.
Does it help us internally? And I say that to say this. There's been this whole thing about how, there's a whole level of corruption in the country, in many spheres. We have not really pursued that in terms of sanctioning or placing charges to putting these rules in place or this legislation in place. Does it force us now to look even more so internally at how we deal with these issues of corruption, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I would put corruption in a basket with a host of particular criminal offenses that are now what they call emerging mandates.
They got terms for everything, eh?
Yeah. Well, I'll explain what I mean by that. So, for example, talking about shifting goalposts, very late in the day, right, in 2014, 2015, they started to speak about proliferation offenses, meaning nuclear weapons smuggling, etc. When they came to the Bahamas in 2015, they walked into banks, spoke to tellers, what do you know about proliferation financing? They say, prolif or what? So it was like, what you know, famous go, what that is. Okay, so, and this is the kind of thing that they put in their report, the in-depth notes saying that none of the frontline people were aware of proliferation offenses. Yeah. And so that was part of the law we had to pass, the anti-terrorism bill, to capture terrorism financing as well as proliferation, nuclear smuggling, etc. But there are other emerging issues. Human trafficking is a big issue now. Right. You saw something South Florida on the news recently. That is right. Human trafficking, and then corruption is in that part too. Okay. The reason I think you have to look at it in terms of our region. Right. Just about every Latin American country that goes through a democratic change ends up imprisoning half of the leadership of the former government.
Yes, that's right.
And they themselves got in on an anti-corruption agenda and did the same thing with their predecessors. So you saw with Fujimori in Peru, the government that imprisoned him, half of them got imprisoned. Yes. The next government that came along put half of the other one. You follow me? But because it's an emotional issue, it is a hot button issue globally. And we get a whole gang, and I can speak just generally, we get a whole drayload of international cooperation requests, the vast majority of which now, particularly from Latin America and also from Europe, are targeted towards corruption investigations. So this is a very hot matter for the world, but it's not a question of parading and internal stuff, okay? It's about your ability to cooperate on all of these emerging issues. So when we drafted the Proceeds of Crime Act, we said we weren't going to make the same mistake that was made since 1996 and again in 2000 of only trying to deal with the crimes du jour, the crimes that are known. So we created something called a framework into which the minister could add every time they think of an X crime that they want to make globally important.
They tell you that on the list tomorrow.
The minister will just gazette it and we'll stick that crime into. Okay, so we're trying to get ahead of the ball on that. Now that's only one aspect of the host of blacklisting threats facing the country right now.
But I want to ask you this question. So even since 2017, the government has seen having to respond to several of these blacklisting threats or alerts or whatever the deal is. Why is it that when you go to this, wherever it is, I don't know, OECD, I don't even know where they exist, or whoever the governing body is, why aren't they just telling you everything in one go? You go there.
The OECD is a club of the largest countries in the world.
We're a small fry.
Who believe that the whole Bretton Woods system, the United Nations system, is not working to their likes, and have decided they are simply pooling their power and their might.
But I get that.
And they are dictating to the whole world.
But I get that. But why not just simply say, if they, in good faith, now, mind you, in good faith, because this is almost like a case you could put before the royal court. In good faith, you go to these people and you say, look, what is it that we need to do to be in compliance? And they say A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
They tell you.
You then come back to the Bahamas and you then enact. I see you do it in a frenzy. Enact legislation that impacts A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
And then they add something else.
Just on almost the very day you pass that legislation, they come up. By the way, let me tell you about LMNOP. Why not just tell you the alphabet one time and you deal with it?
I think the way in which someone once, I think very elegantly put it, is it's basically the same people who go in one room and give some orders, then they go and change their hat, go in another room in another guise, and give some different set of orders, all aimed towards the same end.
Confusion?
No. It's, in my view, I think I'm fairly satisfied that it's gone beyond. It's now, you see, the OECD has shifted its focus now. They keep the FATF there because that's the one that can really get you on a leash and hold you down. And then they've now shifted their overall focus sort of tying it in indirectly with the FATF. It's now on taxes. It is straightforward. Give us our money.
Yeah.
Don't have any framework where we even think for a minute you could be holding on to our money or letting our citizens or anyone who owes us taxes thief those taxes. Yeah. Keep
Period.
or thief.
Period.
Period. And so that's how it goes. Now, if we look at this latest emerging issue about the European Union commissioners coming up with this list, some call it a blacklist. They themselves said it's not a list; it's an advisory. One could think of it as a 28-nation advisory by the, I think, second largest economic power on earth. That has joined the first economic power on earth, the United States. Right. In issuing an advisory based on the FATF, which is essentially what they have targeted. They've latched on to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. The fact that we are in an action plan, that is why they put us on this list.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the fact that under our governance, we've gone from being compliant only in 18 of the FATF 40 in 2017. By December of 2018, 1 month after we'd been placed in the action plan, we were reevaluated and accepted by the FATF as being compliant in 30 of the FATF 40. So that's a massive improvement. Right. You could go on the FATF website and you could Google the Bahamas, find the, not Google, you can go and scroll through and find the Bahamas, and you tap the little blue icon, and you'll see our report, and just the introduction shows you. And then if you go to any other country that has been reevaluated, mostly they may get 1 or 2 areas. But the Bahamas was reevaluated in about 12 or 13 areas out of 16, positively reevaluated. But still, that didn't count with them European commissioners. I went there and I spoke about it, but they said, no, it ain't at all 40. Listen, Saudi Arabia is more compliant in the FATF 40 than the Bahamas. They are at about, with 30, they're at about 36 compliant, technically compliant. But because they said, in these immediate outcomes, remember the 11 outcomes and emerging issues, this new issue? They put Saudi Arabia on the list, on the advisory list.
So they're just into total control. That's it. No sovereignty. This is a sovereignty issue, isn't it, Minister?
This is a global, if you blacklist a country and you really seriously blacklist them, in 2000 the threat was, we're going to take you off of the SWIFT. We're going to take you off the ability to transact any money flows internationally. That was the threat in 2000.
Yeah.
What's the threat now?
The threat now is simply that we will blacklist you. And when we blacklist you, it is tied with their own domestic initiative called de-risking. They're making all of their banks and financial intermediaries and institutions shed risk. Because they would rate their banks domestically as being a security risk if it carried too many accounts from high-risk jurisdictions.
So the banks that's why we had Alan Bowe on just the other day, and he was saying how now this operation in London or in England is becoming now the consolidated broker, so to speak, of dealing with transactions. Because they now can say, okay, we can put all the liability, the banks can put all the liability on this one entity, rather than having to deal with 22, in their view, lesser than great countries.
Right.
This is the question. All right, so what it requires then, Minister, is, and this is what I said to Mr. Bowe, that we have been holding on to this financial services industry as a bread and butter issue for many, many years, because there are a lot of people involved. There are attorneys, there are bankers, there's a whole sector of our economy that is dependent on this issue.
There are thousands of middle-class, ordinary
people. That's what I mean.
Who have a good quality
bank
of
tellers,
life because of it.
Trust officers,
and
all these
people
who
are being threatened daily by the global community.
And I see it.
We have a duty as the government of this country to do everything in our power to fight to defend those middle-class Bahamian jobs.
And we see it because, as I said to Rogan Smith, you can drive through areas in this country that were bastions of middle class, and you could see the impact that the the reduction in activity in the trust business, et cetera, has had on those in terms of how houses are kept up, et cetera, because of now
it is.
Yeah, I remember you saying something to me once. I don't know if you remember it. I think it was in the 2012 election when you were. It was right the night before the election. You said something to me like, "You don't really know how bad it is out there. It's bad." But
economically, yes. And we paid the price
right.
in 2012.
You are the cockpit of this right now. You know, I hate to use analogies and metaphors, etc. But you know, when you're in the cockpit, you can hit the clouds, and you're flying by instrumentation, and but still you want to hit that bright spot, right?
Yes.
Do you see a bright spot? Is there an end game to this, or is it just a constant mouse chasing the cheese type of game?
I always believe that we Bahamians survived on these barren rocks in the most beautiful country in the world. Could hardly grow anything for a sustained period of time. We crafted for ourselves a quality of life that is the envy of this hemisphere, this whole half of the world, from Tierra del Fuego at the foot of Latin America all the way up to the Arctic Circle. We did that because we have creativity, we have genius, we have always managed to think our way out of problems. One of the things that I sought to do with the Proceeds of Crime Act is to make it flexible so that it can adapt to circumstances as they arise, by adding in new powers, adding in new offenses.
Because the process is so laborious, you need that quick.
A quick response. I want to avoid the situation where future governments are crippled by the need to do what we had to do in 2017.
Drafting legislation.
Man, I made a file with a Proceeds of Crime bill with big gaps. The bracketed policy decision needed on this. Next page, bunch of big gaps, policy decision needed on this. But nothing was ever done. It was just sitting there at the bottom of a file. They'd brought in a fellow, Mr. Mitchell, from the UK, and he had the outlines of a bill with a bunch of policy decisions needed and blank spaces. So we had to take all of that up. I don't want any future government to have to go through that.
Right.
You see, but how do we get out of it? It is perilous now. It is hard going now. But I believe that once the rules are settled, and they'll never be fully settled. They'll never be fully settled because they'll continue to change.
Yeah.
But as we learn from this experience, what we must learn to do is to adapt quicker, to keep abreast.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've done to address the fundamental malaise in our responsiveness is, first of all, the Bahamas doesn't have the information. You know why? Because up until earlier this year, we had no diplomatic mission to the European Union.
That's in Brussels?
None. Now, I can tell you, I have long been advocating that for years, but it fell on barren soil. But thankfully, under this present administration, this government, the Prime Minister has appointed an ambassador. And as time goes on, we are just setting it up. Yes, we will put all the diplomatic officers in there, all of the representatives, etc., who will then go out and farm out throughout the different organs of the European Union. So we'll have a better sense of something as it is emerging over there, rather than waiting until it's a fully fleshed out thing and they come in to beat us over our head with it.
By the way, two things. Have you announced who that is yet?
It's a young former banker, youngish, not really young like that. I mean middle-aged former banker. Maria O'Brien.
Okay. We'll be back in a second, talking with the Attorney General, Mr. Carl Bethel, on the issue of the quote-unquote blacklist that never seems to go away. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here, along with Attorney General Carl Bethel. We were talking earlier about this whole. Well, we are talking about this blacklisting OECD. What is it? FATF?
Well, there's the FATF. And then there's the European commissioners tagging on to the FATF.
And one of the things that I thought was, and again, I've said to people, what is important in any administration is to get the fundamentals right, to get the foundations right for building on. And you may not benefit from it, Mr. Bethel, because the average guy on the street may not see the immediate impact of building that foundation. No one could live on a foundation. You got to say, I want to build a house, right? When a man builds a foundation, you can't go, let's move in.
Absolutely.
You got to wait until that roof is on. You have described something about building a foundation for being able to react. One of the things that's always been a criticism is that we do react, and that all we do is react. But the reality is you have to react in some instances. You don't know what's coming. We'll talk about that. But you want to be able to react in a timely manner. So just recapping what you had said, you set a foundation now in legislation where rather than having to go through the whole process, you can just add on the concern. Now, in addition to reaction, you've said now you've appointed this young lady as a ambassador to the European Union for this purpose, I assume. What possibility is there to create a proactive regime so that you have the brightest and best minds who are anticipating, creating bubbles that now they are in the reactionary mode, as opposed to us being in the reactionary mode?
I'll tell you. For example, as I said, the diplomatic mission in Brussels will be fully staffed with some of our best foreign service officers, and their missions will be to go out to forge connections at every level, to get to know all of the movers and shakers and see. It's all a bureaucratic process. If you meet the minister, you're meeting the wrong person. Okay, you are meeting the wrong person. It's some third assistant secretary, some director general of this little thing that you wouldn't think of as being, but they're the ones that the connections have to be made with. Like there's something called the Code of Conduct Group, right, which is a host of very mid-level technocrats, lawyers, and officials, sort of the civil service of the European Union. But they're the ones who you have to pass muster with. They do the technical analysis.
It's the same thing everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I remember Paul Adley, the late great Paul Adley once said very famously that when you're up on the top floor shaking the Secretary of State's hand or whatever, and telling him all your problems, and he's nodding sympathetically at you, there's someone down there on the fifth floor who we used to call the fifth floor boys, but I'm told it's actually the sixth floor, right? Who is writing the epitaph for your country, and you'll never know about it till they hit you with that stick. That's the reality. So we need. It's not so much even the figurehead of the ambassador; it's the technical. Foreign service officers who know how to do this. We have well-trained foreign service in the Bahamas.
I imagine you would also engage people who are expert in the field from other places, not just our people as well.
No. We have retained some expert attorneys who assist us in terms of positioning ourselves. But it's a catch-up game now on this European Union Commission's listing. They'd already made up their mind when they told us about it. Oh, and just to correct some adverse mispropaganda by the opposition. When the Prime Minister traveled, we went to discuss the third initiative that we have, blacklisting threat, that we haven't talked about as yet.
They didn't tell you about the fourth.
That's the BEPS, no, the third. The fourth is, well, that is in someone's head, and that'll probably come at some point, right? But it's not on the horizon yet. The Prime Minister and I went to Brussels to deal with the BEPS initiative, base erosion and profit shifting. It was only a week and a half after we got back that we got an email, or I got an email, sent through Foreign Affairs, who they got it on the 21st. They sent it out to me on the 28th.
I think I was in your presence and you saw it.
Yeah, I turned beet red and started smoke blowing out my ears.
And I saw him reacting to something I didn't.
And so this email says, we've decided, the European Commission has decided to put you on this list for enhanced I nearly went.
I was in the meeting. I was not that meeting, but it was a meeting totally different altogether.
Yeah. No, the meeting we were at would have had to do with this, the other initiatives, the BEPS and all this sort of stuff, but this was something totally out of the blue.
Yeah.
Long after the Prime Minister returned to the Bahamas. So he wasn't over there to talk about that, and nobody talked to us about it when we were there.
Yeah.
Which tells you about them going in different rooms.
That's the question I asked you earlier when I said to you, why aren't they telling you about LMNOP?
No.
They know they got LMNOP stored up for you.
Right?
Exactly. But that's exactly the problem, and that is why we need to have a proper Foreign Service arm over there in Brussels, listening, hearing.
Well, who can say, listen, man,
Give
you
you
ain't
the
give me the whole alphabet, you know.
Yeah.
What the rest of the numbers?
No, let me explain what happened. Something called the Fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive was passed in the European Parliament, approved by the European Council of Ministers, which then meant that it put a mandate on their commissioners to determine high-risk countries based on the things stated in the Anti-Money Laundering Directive. So if we'd had people on the ground, we would have known since the middle of last year that this new list was going to have to be formed at some point. So we would have been able, through our diplomats, to make appropriate representations, to go and meet and greet and at least soften their approach. But, part of the problem is the lack of any presence from the Bahamas. And indeed, quite frankly, virtually every other Caribbean country, I think one or two are there. But we need to get there.
Can you pool your resources as a Caribbean country, or is that not competitive? I mean, what is?
See, the problem in the Caribbean is you have half of the financial service jurisdictions in this area are all British colonies, so they are represented by London.
Right.
Okay, so it's not there. It's us. I think Barbados is there. But Jamaica's there. But us who are in this business aren't there.
Yeah.
Okay. So the third threat is this BEPS matter. We think that based on the Prime Minister's intervention and the changes that we've made, certainly there was a much more positive atmosphere from the time the Prime Minister went over there, and in all of our interactions, because they'd stopped talking to us prior to the Prime Minister going, I can tell you that.
How do you mean they stopped talking?
They just stopped sending us email notes. So they'd send you notes, say, okay, could you look at this, consider this, what about that, your legislation, whatever. They'd reached a point, I guess, where they
were fed up?
Did they
think we were not being responsive?
It's difficult to tell you. All I can tell you is that after the Prime Minister's visit, they opened up and they said, okay, here are some issues that we have. Could you address them? I sent a memo, and so out of the 7 or 8 issues, I managed to satisfy them on all but 2, and there were 2 issues. And then there was one new issue that they brought forward. They brought forward very late in the day. There's one new issue. So there are 3 issues that the amendments we just did totally cover those areas, and they gave us the period of time to do so. There are about 8 countries that they gave this period of time to.
Isn't that a little concerning, though, that they would just cease communication? I mean, what would have happened had the Prime Minister not met with them in that instance?
No, I think that they were going through a process, right, that they were evaluating and they were in their own discussions. What I understand, there were about 8 countries that, they weren't happy with everything that was done. All right? And so they extended the time. And after they did that, the point is it may have been a coincidence, but they extended it after the Prime Minister's visit. Or they gave us, and I think other countries, I'm given to understand, this period until the 24th to kind of satisfy them on all of these issues. And as I said, I was able to show them 5 out of 7. There were 2 issues, and then one very late issue they came forward with, which we also accommodated.
What is next on the horizon? I mean, you would think that. I mean, it seems to me that we've done yeoman's work in trying to catch up I mean, from 2002.
Listen,
What is if you as the Attorney General of
the BEPS initiative started from 2011.
Right.
By 2014, it was a finalized package, and we had the same problem. We hadn't even joined the BEPS, what they call inclusive framework. The center fellow who was in charge of it at that time, called Pascal Saint-Amans, down to the Bahamas in April of 2017. He told the then cabinet, the cabinet of the former government, he told them, if you don't do this, you'll get blacklisted. If you don't join it, you will be blacklisted.
And joining required what?
You had to send them a note that you were giving a high political commitment to it, and that you you then had to sign or indicate your intention to sign a multilateral convention for exchange of information.
That sounds like a 15-minute deal. Your intention to sign, your commitment. Yeah. It sounds like a note.
We had to get elected to do it. And even then, and this to show you just how it is, the Europeans are very, in civil law, they are very focused on wording. If it says X, Y, Z, you can't do Y, X, Q or Y, X, Z even, because it says X, Y, Z. And notwithstanding the fact that we came to office, we knew what the threat was because Mr. Amans, Saint Amans, also saw the opposition. Well, he saw it was a small group, me, the PM, one other person, and we had lunch, and he said what he told the government, and he said, I'm telling you this because if you get elected, we'll have the same expectation of you. And we said, okay, thanks for your concern, and thanks for your forewarning and everything. And he went his way, and we went off, and we won the election. And the first order of business was for us to get straight and to avoid that immediate threat of blacklisting by the end of June. And notwithstanding that now, remember what happened. As part of it, they came with a whole host of stuff, and then they had this letter of commitment. And the first letter of commitment was signed by the wrong person, they say. So when we got that note, we did the letter of commitment signed by the correct person. Then they said, but you didn't use the correct wording. And remember, we had a little blacklisting that went from January or something to May of 2018. We were blacklisted because we didn't use the correct wording. So the Europeans are very meticulous, and this is part of the problem. We tend to be more happy-go-lucky. We want to get the gist of what you think. We try to address what you say to give you the gist of what you want. You got it, but you ain't got it quite like how you want it. No, they want it how they want it, not how you want it.
They don't want you to be able to get out of it by saying you didn't.
You'll be able to argue.
It's a legal thing, right?
It is a legal thing. It is precisely that.
Right. Now,
precisely that.
Let me ask you this, and I don't know, we're getting ready to wind up. It seems to me that this is in the list of importance in the top 5 of things to deal with in this country. Okay, it is a whole. It's like saying we have a steel industry, and the government of the day is being tasked with making sure that there's no barrier to importing a certain raw material in order for us to make steel, which is an important part of our industry. So it's high on the list. Have we treated it that way, Mr. Bethel? Have we treated this? When you say to me that in a previous life, in a previous regime,
I make no reflection on any previous governments.
How is it being looked at now?
It's being looked at with the utmost seriousness now. The threat is palpable. It's real. The reality is, you're going to have people and entities that say, listen, man, I can go to U.S. Virgin Islands. Yeah. Someone was telling me that he's got a gang of them lined up. They want to go to the U.S. Virgin Islands. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, they don't have any of these substance requirements because it's a U.S. protectorate. It is part of the United States of America. And the Europeans can't tell Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Okay? But they don't extend that protection to anybody else because U.S. Virgin Islands is in competition with us. And, if you look at Antigua's experience with the United States with their internet gaming framework,
Stanford,
where they were, no, not Sanford. Sanford was a different aspect.
Okay.
They set up an internet gaming. They were trying to be like Malta,
Okay.
which is the internet gaming capital of Europe, and so and many parts of the world. So the software programs are hosted in Malta, exported to the world, licensed out, and etc. Well, when Antigua was trying to follow in those footsteps and did that and led the way, Uncle Sam put sanctions on them. They sued Uncle Sam in the World Trade Organization. They won their case and couldn't collect a nickel. That's the reality of the world you have.
That's a sad reality because what you're saying is that a jurisdiction in the Caribbean, which happens to be a U.S. protectorate, can do the same thing that we're doing, but we get sanctioned and they don't. It's as simple as that.
It is simple as that. It is a. They talk about
vexing.
the WTO and all of these things, even the FATF. They are rules based and transparent, but those rules don't apply to all, and they don't apply equally. When they do apply.
The fellow say he pull up his ball and go. He's the one who have the ball, right?
Well, and so you have a threat now, and it may take. I mean, the pressure will eventually get to the U.S., but you would need to have a more receptive president than the current one to really make any headway. Usually they try to operate through the congressional delegations, try to get things passed through the Congress. But recently the U.S. Congress, undoubtedly influenced up to a point by their external considerations with Europe, had put forward a bill which mandated financial service operators in Nevada and Delaware to maintain beneficial ownership information. And at the last minute, the whole thing was just ripped out of that bill, just struck off. And they passed their bill without it.
But we have to have that. What is, to you, Mr. Bethel, the line in the sand? I mean, I know that this beneficial owner thing was looked at as possibly being the line in the sand. But from your perspective, is that, first of all, the line in the sand? Or is there something that is more onerous in the future?
The reality is that, certainly with beneficial ownership, we've made it clear that we are not maintaining a centralized registry that can be hacked. What we are going for is the system in place in other jurisdictions in this region where the competent authority, the Attorney General's office, the Minister of Finance, Police, FIU, can have access through computer system into and obtain beneficial ownership, either in the name of companies or individuals. The information is going to be held. A request? Yeah, it has to be a lawful request.
Okay.
But you go through the whole system will be hooked up. Individual financial institutions will hold their own information secure behind their firewalls, but they have to allow the government system access to the information. So that once there's an FIU thing, there's no need for a court order. You do with the FIU, give the FIU the information. If it's a competent authority, we may need to get court orders, etc. But on a criminal matter, the AG's office should be able to go in immediately without a court order to get basic information on beneficial ownership.
Well, we're going to wind up, but I tell you, we learned something here, and I don't know that kind of information gets out at AG with things like this framework that you're putting in place. There's a lot of criticism always. It's globally accepted locally that people feel that we don't react fast enough. You're now telling me that there's legislation in place, indeed?
It is in place. We are at the very last stages now of sourcing the technology. I always say, we move fast in my office when we're ready to. And we passed the bills in I think, towards the end of December.
Right.
And right now we are in the final stages of preparing cabinet paper. We have the costings. We know who the supplier is. They are reputable. They're tried. They're tested. They're used in other areas, other countries in this jurisdiction. They have built a level of trust with financial corporate service providers in those jurisdictions. They are so well recommended. We're ready to go.
Okay.
You get that paper up to cabinet, have that approved, and there's an 8.
You could just add the crime on the list.
Tick that off. Tick that off.
All right, listen. First of all, I want to thank you for coming on such short notice. Very informative, and this is the thing that I think people need to know about the foundations of how things are trying to be resolved, because this doesn't viscerally affect the guy on the street, but it does, because it's our economy, and he has to know that things are being done to prevent it from continuing to happen. So I want to thank you for coming by and sharing that with us.
It affects the middle class of our country, and so we have to do everything in our power to enable our financial sector. This is my last thing I'll say on this. As I said to them in my very first address to them, to the collective group, in order to succeed, you must first survive. Right now, this is a fight for survival. I want our system to survive, our people to survive, our jobs to survive, and then we can compete and succeed.
All right. Thank you, my friend. We shall see you at another time.
All the best, sir.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.